各位議員早晨。我哋今
Members, good morning. This is already our appointed time. May I call the meeting to order? This is a meeting with the Ombudsman. We'd like to welcome Ms. Winnie Chiu, Ombudsman, Mr. K.S. So, Deputy Ombudsman, Mr. S.H. Chan, Assistant Commissioner, as well as Mr. Sarah Zhe. The purpose of the meeting is to allow the Ombudsman to brief members on the work of the Ombudsman's office and allow members to discuss issues of concern to the Council with the administration. May I remind members that the meeting is not protected by the Electoral Powers and Privileges Ordinance, nor are we going to discuss individual cases. So the first thing on the agenda is the Ombudsman to give us a presentation on the work of the Ombudsman's office. The relevant papers have been issued to members before the meeting. We have information paper provided by the Ombudsman on the work of her office. Paper number CP155/2022/01. The Ombudsman's Hong Kong Annual Report for 2021-22, as well as minutes of our last meeting held on the 30th of March 2021. First, I will give the floor to the Ombudsman to give us a presentation, and then I will open the floor. Members have already given us 4 questions for the Ombudsman that will be dealt with at the later part of the meeting. So members, if you wish to speak, please press the request to speak button. So please do not change seats after you are seated so as to facilitate the work of the Secretariat. Ms. Chiu. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members and Chair Lady of the committee. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to meet with members and to brief you on the work of my office in the past 2 years and discuss subjects of concern to us. In the past 2 years, in 2019, COVID-19 caused profound implications to our community, even with the disruption of COVID-19 and also our busy workload. We have played our part as an independent channel for members of the public to lodge complaints, and we try to address concerns of the community. I'd like to brief you on the work of our office in the year 2020-21. 7,505 inquiries and 29,814 complaints were received during the year, and we completed processing 30,021 complaints. During the year, we received a record high number of complaints. 25,155 of them were topical complaints. Again, it was also a record high. But if we discount those topical complaints, the number of complaints we received was similar to past years, hovering around 5,000 per year. Now, based on the allegations made by the complainants, in the year 2021-2022, the top 3 causes for complaints were ineffective control, accounting for 82.2% of the complaints, error, wrong advice or decision, 7%, and delay or inaction, 2.8% rather. Ineffective control was the most common cause of complaint. The majority of complaints under this category were topical complaints. Among the 30,000 odd cases already completed, 2,800 or so of them were pursued and concluded, and among them, 220 or 7.5% were related to COVID-19 pandemic. Major issues were granting of subsidies, public services disruptions, refund of higher emission charges, and quarantine arrangements, etc. For the remaining 27,000 odd cases that were closed after assessment, most of them were topical complaints. For cases that can be pursued, that depending on the nature and complexity, we may either use inquiry or mediation or full investigation. In this year, inquiry remained the chief mode of complaint handling. And 87.8% of the cases pursued and concluded by this mode, and 5.9% and 6.3% of them were concluded by full investigation and mediation, respectively. Of the cases concluded by full investigation and inquiry, inadequacies were found on the part of the departments or organizations concerned in 47.3% and 14.4% of the cases, respectively. Complaints relating to access to information, there were 110 in total, the highest in recent years. And among the 136 complaints processed, 58 of them, or 42.2% of them, had inadequacies identified on the part of departments or organizations. The most common forms of administration were non-compliance with a specific provision of the Code on access to information, unreasonable refusal or hindrance, and wrong application or interpretation of the provision of the Code. This reflected a lack of full understanding of the spirit and principles of the Code by some departments and public organizations. The Ombudsman has the power to conduct direct investigations in the absence of complaints that will enable me to probe systemic flaws or general deficiencies at a macro level rather than in individual cases. In 2020-21, we completed 9 direct investigations. For the topics of those DIs, please refer to Chapter 2, page 23 of the Chinese version of our annual report. Now we have made a total of 194 recommendations for improvement on various aspects of public administration. As of November 2022, 99% of the recommendations have been accepted by the departments and organizations concerned for implementation. Now, because of the impact of COVID-19, it took a little bit longer for some departments and organizations under complaint to respond to investigations and inquiries. During the year, we also put in place special work arrangements which affected our efficiency. While we were able to meet most of the targets of our service standard in complaint processing, we only managed to conclude 98.1% of complaint cases within 6 months, missing the targets by 0.9%. Now I'd like to brief members on the work of my office in the year 2021-2022. After receiving an unprecedented number of complaints in 2020-21, the total number of complaints we received last year was 4,934, and that had returned to a more stable level. We also received 8,851 inquiries, and we completed in total 5,032 complaint cases. Based on the allegations made by the complainants, the top 3 causes for complaint last year were error, wrong advice or decision, accounting for 38.1% of the cases, and effective control, accounting for 18.7%, and delay or inaction, accounting for 12.5%. These top 3 causes for complaint were the same as those for 2020-21. There was just a slight change in order. Among the 5,000 odd cases processed, 2,700 or so cases were pursued and concluded, and the remaining 2,200 odd were assessed and were closed due to insufficient grounds to pursue or jurisdictional or legal restrictions. Of cases pursued and concluded, 206 or 7.5% of them were related to COVID-19. the number was roughly similar to that of the previous year. Key matters on the complaint in these cases included the granting of subsidies, quarantine arrangements and documents, and disruption to public services, etc. Inquiry remained our chief mode of complaints handling, with about 88 or 89% of the cases pursued and concluded by this mode, while 3.4% and 7.8% were concluded by full investigation and mediation, respectively. Of the complaints concluded by full investigation and inquiry, 53.3% and 16.4% of these cases involved inadequacies found on the part of departments or organizations concerned. Now, we had another rewarding year in our mediation work. A total of 215 cases were concluded by mediation, with 23 participating departments and organizations. Compared to inquiry and full investigation, mediation is a speedier way to resolve complaints, with the averaging processing time being 13.4 days. Among those cases successfully mediated, over 92% were resolved within 1 month, and over half of the cases took less than 10 days. Based on the responses to our questionnaire surveys, over 9% of the complaints and all of the participating organizations have positive impression of our mediation service, and most of them were satisfied with the performance of our mediators. During the year, we received a total of 87 complaints about access to information. Among the 93 complaints pursued and concluded, we found adequacies on the part of the departments or organizations concerned in 30 cases, that is 32.3%. The common forms of inadequacies were non-compliance with a specific provision of the Code on access to information, wrong application, interpretation of the provision of the Code, and unreasonable refusal or hindrance. We also completed 8 direct investigations. The subjects covered could be found in the annual report 2021-22, the Chinese version, page 21, chapter 2. During the year, we made a total of 139 recommendations for improvement. Among them, 74 were related to individual complaint cases, and 64 resulted from direct investigations. As of November 2022, 95% of the recommendations have been accepted by the departments and organizations concerned for implementation. Now, because of COVID-19, we continued to implement various anti-epidemic measures, including special work arrangements. In the last quarter, we strived to maintain our capacity to investigate complaints by streamlining our operation and making use of technology. We managed to continue taking hotline calls in person even when working from home. Overall, we're able to meet all targets of our service standards in processing inquiries and complaints.
Next, I will cover the 8 months from April to November 2022. The office received a total of 6,570 inquiries and 3,860 complaints over the period. A total of 3,765 complaint cases were processed. As at November 2022, our office completed and announced 5 direct investigations, with 12 still in progress. The direct investigation cases are as follows: management and effectiveness of waste separation bins, effectiveness of rodent prevention and control by the Food and Environmental Hygiene Department, the regulation of paragliding activities of the Civil Aviation Department, problem of abandoned vehicles on government land, and problem of alleged illegal operation of Kaito ferry service. The office expects that for the DIs completed this year, the number will be comparable to the previous year. As before, we will publish all our direct investigation reports on the office's website and choose those reports of wide public interest or community concern for announcement at press conferences. For directions in 2019 and 2024, we have set out our strategic plan despite the constraints of COVID-19. For the 4-point strategic plan, they are enhancing community awareness of the role and the services of the Ombudsman, fostering improvement in the quality of and fairness in public administration, enhancing transparency, efficiency, and quality of our work, and enhancing staff development and knowledge management. Apart from that, that is bolstering our organizational capacity for meeting future challenges. We will continue to enhance information transparency and public understanding of our work through our website and social media. We have revamped our website to facilitate public use of our service and information navigation. We are also producing a new corporate video for promotion and publicity in the future. We have also drawn up an information and communications technology strategic plan adopting a 3-pronged strategy: efficiency, effectiveness, and essentiality to drive the digital transformation of the office. Our office will continue to discharge our functions with the utmost conviction and meet challenges with perseverance and agility. Through objective and impartial investigation, we are committed to promoting a fair and accountable public administration. We need the continued support of our stakeholders, including the public, the media, legislators, and public officers. Lady Chair, I will stop here and we will be happy to take questions and note any comments members may have. 4 members wish to speak on the item. 3 minutes for each member. Let's make good use of our time. First, Mr. Ronick Chan. Lady Chair, I have some questions about the figures. From 2020 to 21, there were 194 recommendations, 167 were from complaint cases, 68 were from direct investigations. But Adam update should be 235, but the total says 194 recommendations. Does it mean there were overlapping recommendations? That's my first question. Second question, for recommendations through complaints and recommendations through direct investigations, the ratio in 2020-21, that was roughly 2.4 to 1. So that means more recommendations from complaints. From 2021 to 22, the ratio dropped to 1 to 1. But you take out the 25,000 topical complaints in 2020 to 21. The complaints back then was roughly 4,660 complaints. For 2021 to 22, the number was 4,934 cases. This means you got more complaints. For the recommendations from complaints actually dropped. Were most of those recommendations from topical complaints from the previous years? You said that people were happy with the mediators. How many mediators are there at the office? People are happy with the mediators. Can we have more mediators to speed up the processing of the complaints? So as to enhance public satisfaction with the service. The Ombudsman, please. I will provide supplementary information later on about the discrepancy. Now, for the recommendations, it depends on the nature of the complaints. Things change from year to year. So you cannot have an apple-to-apple comparison by looking at the percentage from year to year. For each case, it has its own unique characteristics, whether it's a complaint or direct investigation. There are complex aspects. You can have topical complaints. So you cannot just look at the number and the ratio. So my apologies. I cannot give you a concrete answer on the difference in the percentage. For mediation services, we want to promote the use of mediation. For this year, the mediation numbers have gone up. 90% of our staff has had mediation training. Some have received certification. So they have the qualifications for mediation. For our investigators, they can take part in mediation. Next, Ms. Carmen Khan. I have one suggestion and 3 questions. The Ombudsman's report provides a lot of figures and comparisons with previous year's figures. Can we have a PowerPoint slide to supplement the Ombudsman's presentation? Can we have bar charts and pie charts so that we can all visualize the figures? In paragraphs 9 and 20, in various years, some recommendations were not accepted. Can the Ombudsman tell us the 1% of recommendations that were not accepted and the 5% of recommendations that were not accepted? What kinds of recommendations are they? In paragraph 18, inadequacies were found. They have to do with the Code on Access to Information. In the office's findings, do you see a need for a review of the code to enhance the transparency of public administration? In paragraph 25, there's a 5-year plan. We're heading into the 4th year. Apart from these directions, what has been done? Under item A, enhancing community awareness, there's a revamped website and publicity video. For items B to D under paragraph 25, can you tell us what has been done specifically? The Ombudsman. We thank the member for the suggestion about using PowerPoint slides to aid the presentation. We'll consider using that next time. In the annual report, there are all kinds of charts and explanations. We can put some of that information in PowerPoint slides when we brief members next time. For recommendations not accepted, the department were considering whether to accept those recommendations at that point. It takes resources to accept some recommendations. The recommendations involve reworking the workflow or amending legislation. To achieve that, the government departments involved will need time before they can indicate whether they accept the recommendations. Over time, you will see a higher rate of recommendations being accepted. For more recent cases, you see the acceptance rate at 90%, but for older cases, you see acceptance rate at 99%. So over time, the acceptance rate goes up. Next, Mr. Stephen Ho. For the 3rd and 4th questions that were not answered, for the Code on Access to Information, the Ombudsman represents an appeal mechanism. That people go to government departments for information. For more than 90% of the cases, people do get the information. People come to us for an appeal. some government departments may not be very familiar with how to interpret the code, but they accept our recommendation afterwards. Depending on the time available, we may have a second round of questions. Mr. Stephen Ho, please. I thank the Ombudsman's office for all the work they have done. People and lawmakers raised questions, and the office has responded. But people may not be fully aware of the roles and responsibilities of the office. Many cases are completed in the annual report. But what counts as a completed case? Members have raised questions about the water seepage and the Joint Office for Investigation of Water Seepage. There was a direct investigation years ago, more than one direct investigation, more than 15 years. We don't see the Joint Office doing its work. Has this case been completed by the Ombudsman? Recommendations are made, but the problems remain unresolved. That leaves people wondering if the Ombudsman's office is just a toothless tiger. They make the recommendations and then it's done. Is there a simple way for the Ombudsman to tell people what the office do? For the Ombudsman's office, we look at whether there is maladministration. If there is such a problem, then we make recommendations to improve public administration. It would take more than a complaint to address many livelihood issues. We do direct investigations. We identify the inadequacies and make recommendations on those inadequacies. After the recommendations are implemented, there is some improvement. But some improvements may be short-lived. This has to do with the implementation, supervision. So in these cases, more investigations may be needed. We also look for whether there are ways to improve things for water seepage before our direct investigations. There wasn't even a joint office for investigating water seepage issues. But then you had the institution, and the office may not be able to resolve the problem right away, so that will require further follow-up.
A short follow-up, please. Now, for a case, it took more than 15 years. So how do you assess the precision of your recommendations? So they followed your recommendations for 15 years. We've still seen a backlog of cases. How do you assess the success or otherwise of your recommendations? You have overrun, Mr. Stephen Ho. We can follow up on this later. Dr. Junius Ho, well, there is no need to wait for a later stage, because I'm asking the same question. We can't afford to wait for 15 years after 15 years. I think the Joint Office, in fact, has a seepage problem. It has resources given to them have been lost. Now, for instance, in your report, you talked about setting up various arrangements. I have handled several cases where the Joint Office failed to help in one way or another. They have been counterproductive. So if you ask me to give you a score, I would say 20 out of 100, because you haven't given us value for money. Of course, we do not just look at money spent, because money spent may not always yield results. Now, for the joint office, we have to accept three things. First, we have an aging building stock, and this problem is going to aggravate. Old water mains, old sewage pipes, etc. And we have to understand that water always flow from a high point to a low one. So whether you use infrared or not, we know that the water must have come from the top stories. That's the rule of cavity. So we must deal with the story above, the one with water seepage. And then them are both master bedrooms and also guest bathrooms. If you just check on one of the two bathrooms, then you've been derelict in your duty. And then FEHD has been too wishy-washy. They are lazy, and they may stop working before 3:30 p.m. The joint office, no exception, may be not so serious. Now, I'd like you to rate the performance of the joint office. Please focus on the report. Yes, I'm talking about the report. Now, we should not just look at recommendations. Rather, if they failed to achieve the targets, then you should punish them. And if you fail to achieve your target, who should punish you? I think we should use parliamentary language, please. I am a member of this council as well, Chair. Ombudsman. Yes, some of the recommendations have been implemented, and for the rest, they're still working on them. I think Dr. Ho speaks for some members of the public and legislators as well. I think he has expressed the feelings of members of the public who have yet to see the cases resolved. Ms. Eunice Yong, I thank the Ombudsman for her contribution. There are so many complaints against the government departments, and I thank the Ombudsman for concluding the complaints and giving recommendation to address inadequacies such as wrong decisions and inaction. And I also want to praise the office for its work in mediation. We have 217 cases resolved by means of mediation, and you have your own mediators. I think that is a good example for other government departments. I think government departments should also serve the role of mediation. They should not wait until cases have gone to your office. I think government departments should have their own mediators. We have seen cases going to you after complaining to relevant departments to no avail. And I think this is duplication of resources and also mismatch of resources and manpower. So all departments should have their own mediation teams to handle cases, and your office should be just an additional channel. You have set out the departments that have the greatest number of complaints. Now, the housing department, the FEHD, the lands department, etc. And you've also told us departments that have been very proactive in following up your recommendations. Now, lands department, transport department, they haven't been included as departments are being very proactive in engaging in mediation. I'd like to know is because of the nature of the cases or the attitude of the departments that they have not used mediation. For these departments, is it because they don't want to, or is it because the cases are not suitable? Ombudsman. Mediation is an expeditious way for handling cases to the satisfaction of the parties concerned. However, the willingness on the part of the participants is required. For instance, a complainant might have already complained to a certain department. To no avail, it has come to our department, and the complainant may not be willing to accept mediation. And on department's part, some of the cases are rather complicated or involve principles, and mediation may not be possible. But for cases like granting of subsidies, we have handled many such cases in the past year because cases could be resolved during a very short time, and so departments concerned were willing to accept mediation. It depends on the nature of the cases. It's not the case that some departments are particularly resistant to mediation. 5 members are waiting to speak in the first round and 2 in the second round. So we must be more efficient because we still have another item. Mr. Shanghai Long, thank you, Chair. I thank the Ombudsman for her office work. We have seen a drop in the number of cases, and that is not easy because usually, I understand the members of the public will call the department concerned, and if they do not get any result, they will call 1823, and then the Ombudsman is the last resort. So the Ombudsman should not just look at cases she has received. It should think of ways to improve administration and procedures and make legislative proposals. I'd like to have some data in this regard. Because the Ombudsman has identified inadequacies on the part of some government departments. So can you tell us how you can improve administration efficacy? And then you talked about setting out an IT strategy. I'd like to know how you can make good use of INT to enhance the efficiency of your work. Thank you. Now, results from our handling of complaints and direct investigations, we usually come up with recommendations for improvement. We just gave you the number of complaints. As for the percentage of cases leading to administrative or rather legislative amendments, while I don't have the exact figures, I can give you some example. For instance, the dumping of used vehicles in public places. We conducted an direct investigation. We proposed to the administration that the law be amended so that vehicle owners are required to deal with their abandoned vehicles, and the Transport Department has the power to recover the costs used to handle or dispose of those abandoned vehicles. We also proposed penalties. As for the regulation on paragliding, now we do not have any regulation of paragliding activities. And when there is an accident, it's hard to investigate. So we advise that the legislation be amended so that there can be a certification system for paragliding activities. And that is an example how we have promoted legislative amendments. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Thank you, Chair. I thank the Ombudsman for giving us an account of her work. Many people feel that the Ombudsman office is an avenue when they feel that they are victims of maladministration, then the Ombudsman's office is a way out. You have conducted many direct investigations. We're interested to know whether departments have accepted your recommendations and make improvements. Otherwise, your efforts will go down the drains. You have spent time and energy to investigate, but then if departments pay no heed to your recommendations, it's useless. For instance, the Joint Office on Water Seepage is one example. And in 2016, you conducted a DI on the insufficiency of lifeguards in beaches and pools run by the LCSD. Some of them had to be closed. Many of us will still remember that report. In your report, you talked about vacancies and recruitment difficulties. You gave an analysis of the problem. I'd like to know whether the problem has been resolved, because every year we still see closure of beaches and swimming pools because of lifeguard shortages. In 2021, we were over 600 lifeguards short, so only 22 of our 40-odd beaches were open, and most of our public pools could only be open partially. After the pandemic or during relaxation of social distancing measures, many members of the public would like to go to our beaches and swimming pools, but some of them were closed. And I don't know how many of your recommendations have been implemented. So if you do not follow up on whether departments have implemented your recommendations, then your work will not really be effective. We members may query whether the Ombudsman's office is useful or not. Ombudsman, thank you for your question. Regarding recommendation implementation, yes, we are equally concerned about that. Members of the public attach a lot of significance to our recommendation and their implementation. We have always followed up on the implementation, and we will ask departments whether our recommendations have been put in place. And every year, we will give a government minute to the council to list out the outcome of DI and handling of complaints, and also the status of the recommendations concerned. We give a report to the council on an annual basis. This is part of the mechanism. And then we keep chasing departments to see whether the recommendations have been implemented. If they haven't, then we will continue to follow up with them. And if we discover any serious maladministration, we can also put a question to the CE and as well as to the council.
Now, the case about the swimming pools and lifeguards, we will look into this problem to look for a solution. I want to highlight the point. Under the Ombudsman's ordinance, for any appointment of personnel, these are matters beyond the scope of investigation for the Ombudsman. So for the investigation we conducted, we could only make some recommendations, but we cannot go any further. There's the ordinance that prevents us from going into areas like recruitment, hiring. Mr. Charles Siu-chung. The Ombudsman's office completes investigations and then compiles a report. Our concern is, once the recommendations are made, how are they implemented by various government departments? More than 90% of the recommendations have been implemented. But does that mean the problems have been resolved? That's something we should look at. So here are my questions. How often does the office monitor the implementation? Is there time for the government departments to provide a report? Can the office get the departments involved to update the office on how the recommendations are implemented? Can we have a progress report made available to the Legislative Council or to the public? Say you have a case, the departments implemented your recommendations, but the problems are still there. Take the example of the Joint Office for Investigating Water Seepage. Recommendations are implemented, but the problems are still there. Does the Ombudsman's office look at the feasibility, viability of its own recommendations? The Ombudsman, in terms of monitoring the implementation of recommendations, we look at the complexity of the recommendations. In some cases, legislative amendments are needed. In those cases, we allow more time. Other recommendations are more about the operations of departments. In such cases, you just need guidelines to the staff. So in those cases, we will follow up every quarter. In other cases, we follow up after a longer time frame. For recommendations and the daily operations of departments, our direct investigations focus on the system, the structure, the monitoring structure. We make recommendations on those fronts. So any change has to do with the system. But as for the operation and monitoring within each department, that work is for the departmental staff. So even if you have a monitoring system, if the operation falls short, then we go after those departments. But there are things beyond the scope of the Ombudsman's office. We identify the inadequacies and make recommendations. But the day-to-day monitoring of the operation is something for the departmental heads and the management staff in those departments. Ineffective control is a systemic problem. We identified inadequacies involving ineffective control, and that's one problem we identified. Next, Mr. Peter Shiu. In paragraph 11 of the report, in 2020 to 21, there was an unprecedented number of complaints received. We can understand that. Back then, the national security law was promulgated, and then we also had an improved electoral system. Many lawmakers in the opposition camp absconded. Some district councillors left. So for some people with complaints, they may not come to the pro-establishment camp when they have grievances and complaints. The Ombudsman's office received an unprecedented number of complaints. I think that could be part of the reason. There was a spike in the workload for the office, so So that's a lot of work for the office. Last year, the complaint numbers became stabilized. Inquiries were received 8,885. 5,000 or so were completed. For the remaining inquiries, why are those inquiries still outstanding? There were also direct investigations over the years in addition to handling complaints. I agree with the areas you investigated. I receive people complaining about those problems. So you are looking at the things people are concerned about. In terms of your jurisdiction, there are limits on the Ombudsman for serious flaws. Have you come across cases with serious problems such that the Ombudsman had to go to the Chief Executive? Can you tell us? And is there a need for more manpower at the Ombudsman's office given the increase in service demand? The Ombudsman, for the unprecedented number of complaints received, it had to do with the social atmosphere. For some complaints, people saw some accusations online, so they filed complaints that led to more than 20,000 topical complaints. There were a few topics. So there were people just following the herd in filing complaints. For many such complaints, we identified no need to follow up because the complainants failed to show or provide information of their name. They did not leave contact details, so there was no way to pursue the matter. They could not prove that they were the aggrieved parties. They came across information online, so they filed complaints, but they were not really the aggrieved party. So those cases were concluded with no follow-up investigation. Some cases are completed, but others are outstanding. Some cases take more than a year to complete. Our service pledge is that we receive a complaint. Within 3 to 6 months, we conclude the complaint. More than 80% of the cases were completed within 3 months. More than 99% of the cases were completed within 6 months. Most cases were wrapped up within 3 months, so you have enough power, manpower that is. In 2021, the Ombudsman was no longer part of the government structure, so we had to hire with our own resources. We had 90 or so officers. Now we have 123 officers in our establishment, so we can still cope with the workload. We want to conclude each complaint as quickly as possible so that people can hear from us quickly. That's why we're promoting the use of mediation. On average, it takes just 13 days to resolve a case for mediation. We have overrun for this item. 2 members want to speak for the first turn and another 2 speaking for the second round. If you wish to speak, please press the button. We may have to compress the time for the next item. If no other member wishes to speak on this item, we will move to the next item after the 4 members. Mr. Tang Fei. Good morning, Ms. Chiu. The Ombudsman's office made recommendations to various government departments. 139 recommendations were made. Some involved legislative amendment, others involved changing guidelines. But appointment and recruitment are off limits for the Ombudsman. Is there a statutory duty on each government department to respond to the improvement recommendations from the Ombudsman? Some cases were referred to the Legislative Council, others went to the Chief Executive's office. So the Ombudsman's office is trying to keep following up with various departments to get them to respond. So there appears to be no statutory duty on each department to respond to the Ombudsman. From my experience, when I propose something or put a question to a mainland government agency, they have to respond to us as the MPPCC. Each year, the agencies in the mainland have to set out these matters in the annual report. We have a highly efficient government. Is there a statutory duty on each department to respond to the Ombudsman? If no, do you see there's a need to amend the Ombudsman's ordinance to increase the power under the ordinance for the Ombudsman? Under the Ombudsman's ordinance, there's no statutory power for the Ombudsman to make government departments respond to us. We follow up with departments on recommendations. In our annual report, we set out all the recommendations following direct investigations and full investigations. This will facilitate monitoring. Every year, the government has to respond to those recommendations. This is set out in the government's reply tabled at the Legislative Council. So there is a mechanism. This is not required under statute, but there is follow-up. More than 99% of the recommendations were implemented. The last member to speak for the first round, that's my turn. Many members touch on the same issue. We acknowledge the Ombudsman's office work over the years, especially over COVID. The impression we have is that the Ombudsman's office hits the service target. More than 99% of the recommendations were implemented. And even for the shortfall, it was only 0.9%. Most complaints were concluded within 3 to 6 months. For certain issues, though, there were repeated investigations. And the office looks like a one-trick pony. As the Ombudsman just said, if needed, the matter can be raised with the Chief Executive's office or raised at LegCo. Has this been tried? Apart from investigating for maladministration, there's also identifying systemic inadequacies to address public discontent and improve public administration. Handling complaints, that's something the Ombudsman has handled up to more than 99%. But it appears that apart from more investigations, there are no forceful, powerful ways for the office to address the complaint. Will there be new approaches, new means for the office to achieve even better results on top of investigations? People come to the office. They want to see recommendations being made and then real improvement. Take seepage as an example. I echo Mr. Stephen Ho's point. The problems are still there because the measures didn't work. In this new era, will there be new approaches? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Of course, our vision is to enhance the standard of public administration, whether we talk about the systems or the actual operation. We want to do that. But our power comes from the Ombudsman ordinance, but we also have a soft power, and that is our influence through the mass media and also through discussion with the heads of department. We will use our soft power effectively to ensure the government departments understand that they have fall short of expectations of the public, such as rodent infestation. After our DI, the administration responded very proactively. We pointed out a number of inadequacies. Now there is a task force on district affairs led by the CS4 Deputy CS4A, and the work is a result of our work, and also deep-rooted problems that are hard to handle, such as street cleanliness. We are conducting a direct investigation. We have been exploring with the administration various measures, and we see that the task force is moving towards the right direction very effectively. So we have enhanced the effectiveness and efficiency of the work of some departments. But water seepage is a problem. Water seepage is about building management, and that is there is water seepage in a building that involves building facilities. The power of the joint office comes from the municipal services and hygiene ordinance that is about nuisance. Now, if you have nuisances affecting other households, then the joint office will identify the source, and then a notice for abatement of the nuisance will be issued, requiring the relevant flat owners to do something. But if it's not confirmed to be a nuisance, it may be water seepage from the facade of the building, water seepage from rainwater seeping into the building from the facade. Then the joint office will not consider that a nuisance, and so it cannot take action against that. Now, Ombudsman, we are pressed for time. Perhaps we can talk about that at a later stage. All right. 3 members would like to speak in the second round because we have 4 particular issues to discuss. Each member can only speak for 1 minute, and then the Ombudsman will give a consolidated reply. Ms. Carmen Kuhn, the Ombudsman has resumed office for close to 4 years. Is she going to review the Ombudsman ordinance to enhance the power of the office so that it can follow the lead of the chief executive in being result-oriented? Now, if there is no legislative amendment, given that a memorandum of understanding has been put in place for so long, will there be a review in the relationship between the work of the Ombudsman's office and the government? Dr. Junius Ho. Now, water seepage is a problem. I think you should establish a demerit point system so that members of the public will understand what what are the causes of the problem? Is it because of the organization of the department or lack of resources, etc.? You should tell us all the reasons so that we can give you support. While in the ordinance there is no power for demotion or transfer of officers, but then you are the Ombudsman. You should set up a system to allocate scores to different government departments. Ms. Elizabeth Quat, what can we do to ensure the recommendations by the Ombudsman will not just be accepted but implemented? The Joint Office on Water Seepage hasn't done a good job, and water seepage is bothering many people in Hong Kong. But, well, a shortage of lifeguards can cost lives. We have seen swimmers drowned every year because of shortage in lifeguards. This term of government is result-oriented. I hope the Ombudsman will ensure that government departments take action after knowing your recommendations. Now, we started to talk about shortage in lifeguards in 2016. You have to go back and follow through your recommendations to see if they have been recommended or have been implemented. For instance, can you give us a report and review your recommendations in the past 10 years and tell us how many of them have been taken on board and implemented? Thank you. Ombudsman. Well, you can see from our website as well as social media, we will tell members of the public recommendations that have been followed. Yes, what you said will be considered. We will see how we can maximize our work, and so that the outcome of our work can be made known to the public. Members have made a number of suggestions. They are anxious for your work. Given that we're in a new era, I hope you can enhance your effectiveness and help the government to improve its administration. Now, if members have further questions, or if there are questions you feel that the Ombudsman has not adequately addressed, do put them down in writing and pass it on to our Secretariat, and the Ombudsman will give you a written reply. Ombudsman, you mentioned power on your part to mention cases or departments' performance to the council as well as the CE. Have you ever done that? Now, we're in a new era. If you want to amend the legislation, now we are rather rational here. The difficulties in the past are now gone. And if you want to amend the Ombudsman ordinance, if you want to be more effective in your work, then you can do something about that. All right, members, if you want written responses from the Ombudsman, pass them on to the Secretariat, and the Ombudsman will reply in writing later. We have to move on because we have 4 specific issues. Now, rest assured, Ombudsman, we support your work. In this new era, let's see what furthermore we can do. All right, second part of the meeting, issues raised by members. We have got 4. The relevant papers have been given to the Ombudsman as well as members of the Council. Now, on the approval of new drugs by the Department of Health is a question raised by Ms. Elizabeth Quat. Again, we can't afford to spend more than 15 minutes in each item, so please be very precise and concise. Ms. Elizabeth Quat, please raise your issue. Thank you. As mentioned in my question to the Ombudsman, I have received many complaints from patients or family members of patients. They have been waiting very hard for new drugs. that can cure cancer or rare diseases available in other parts of the world and not available in Hong Kong. So as a result, treatment is delayed or they cannot have access to drugs that can cure their conditions. Now, this is an issue raised by many patients in the community, and they're saying that the registration system of new drug is too harsh and the procedures are too protracted, and we haven't been able to use drugs developed by the mainland or drugs developed by other countries but are reused in the mainland. So, how come there are drugs already in use in other parts of the world, including our country, and yet they can't be used in Hong Kong? And for drugs developed in the mainland and being used there, why can't we use that in Hong Kong? So there is a problem with the current system. Your reply says that this is the approval procedure and you do not have the professional judgment to tackle this. Now, we are not talking about a particular drug. We don't need any medical knowledge to discuss this policy. So, will you review the new drug registration system in Hong Kong to see whether we have adversely affected the treatment of some patients? In particular, our country has been very efficient in developing new drugs, and they are much cheaper than drugs produced overseas. So new drugs have to go through rather difficult procedures. They need certification overseas, and then before they can be used in Hong Kong. Is that really necessary? Of course, we should safeguard lives and health of patients. We have to ensure that these drugs are of quality. But if they are already in use in the mainland, how come we can't have them in Hong Kong? Ombudsman, thank you, Ms. Quat, for your view. We will keep track of the developments. I understand that the Secretary has recently briefed the Council on procedures for the Department of Health to approve new drugs. Now, one of the questions is the threshold too high? Now, this can be medical professional judgment. The second aspect is whether the procedures are too protracted. The second part we can evaluate. But if it's in the case of the former, that is medical professional judgment, this is not something we can investigate to see whether there is any maladministration. But we will keep in view the development, and then we will see what we can do in due course.
Dr. Junius Ho. The Ombudsman looks at the procedure for inadequacies. For matters involving medical professional judgment, that's something beyond the Ombudsman and beyond me as well. That's right. But I want to make 2 points. Are we losing focus due to this obsession with professional judgment? We're asking doctors to be professionally English, but this is old thinking. Are we still supposed to stick to UK or US standards, or do we still have to stick to EU standards? Does it mean that mainland standards don't count? Take rapid antigen tests, for example. In the mainland, RT kits are used everywhere in the mainland. But in Hong Kong, the Department of Health says that we have to follow EU standards. Why aren't we following mainland standards? You don't need professional judgment to tell. 1.4 billion people in China are using the RT kit. Why are we so ossified in our outlook? This is about attitude. We are tying our own hands with this kind of thinking. There's a political choice in the process. If we're sticking to EU standards while dismissing mainland standards, then we're just too obsessed with overseas standards while dismissing mainland standards. We don't have to get hung up over EU standards. That's my point. The Ombudsman. Thank you. We will stay objective and take a fair and impartial view of things, and if needed, we will step in. Dr. David Lam. We stick to a secondary review mechanism in Hong Kong's drug registration. So for drugs registered elsewhere, we look at the information, but we do not allow the use of a drug in Hong Kong if it's not already used elsewhere. That means delay in the use of drugs in Hong Kong. Last year, I wrote to the Food and Health Bureau. Among the list of countries or regions recognized, Hong Kong follows the experience of overseas countries, but our own country, the National Medical Products Administration, wasn't part of it. Then there was a change to the guidelines so that the NMPA was included. Do we have the capability for primary review instead of sticking to the secondary review approach for new drugs? Can we let the relevant authorities know we should get started with this? We will do research on this and see if there's any maladministration for our investigation. And now it's my turn. Many people in the relevant sectors made the same point as Ms. Kwok just then. As we make progress in innovation and technology, we are falling behind if we stick to the existing regime. So does the Ombudsman look at maladministration and maladministration alone? The annual report says that the Ombudsman is supposed to propose improvement measures to improve public administration. Some of these things go beyond just maladministration. We may have an approval system with a high safety margin. It's a safe system, but does it mean that we are keeping up with the needs of the times? Are we really creating strong impetus for growth with that kind of regime? The Ombudsman said more research is needed. What kind of trigger point will prompt a follow-up action? Is it just maladministration? Members and people in the community raise their concerns. As a matter of improving public administration, is that something that can get you started with your work? Improving public administration touches on many aspects, policy, the use of resources, for example. We follow the Ombudsman's ordinance. We invoke the powers under the ordinance and follow the scope defined under the ordinance. There's a definition to maladministration. Powers to investigate maladministration comes from the ordinance. But we don't take too narrow a view of maladministration in terms of simply delays or complaints. We see where we can come in to help contribute to a better system. We will make good use of our existing powers. Ms. Chu, I was reading out from the Ombudsman's office annual report. Here it says that the Ombudsman follows Cap 370. This is an independent statutory body recommending remedial measures to address public discontent and improve public administration. I know the office focuses on maladministration, but what I was reading comes from the annual report of your office. So can you take a broader view of things and consider our comments? Ms. Carmen Khan? I agree with Dr. David Lam. And Madam Chair, you just raised this point. When you have omission, is that a case of maladministration? Is there room for the Ombudsman to play a greater role? We just propose reviewing the Ombudsman's ordinance, and we also mentioned this memorandum with the government. The Ombudsman the omissions can be a case of maladministration. For maladministration, we'll look at the existing procedures and the work that is supposed to be done by the officers. If the officers fail to do the job, that's maladministration. But when it comes to policy matters, do they amount to maladministration? This will depend on the fact of each case. An officer has their duties, but then the principal officials has their own work. There's a difference. When we look at maladministration, we look at public administration. But when it comes to policies, that's something up to principal officials. So you have to look at where the inadequacy lies. Ms. Carmen Khan, this is a point worth exploring for the new term government. When something is not in the job description of a bureau or department, then the Ombudsman doesn't look at it. Does any member wish to speak for the second round? If you do, please press the button. Ms. Elizabeth Quat. The Ombudsman said she will look at this matter from the perspective of maladministration. I don't think that's right. We have a very safe but conservative drug registration regime. I doubt there is any maladministration per se in the regime. But in the annual report, paragraph 14 of the Chinese version, roles and responsibilities, identify inadequacies in the public administration. That's part of the duties, part of the statutory duties of the Ombudsman. We are talking about faster and better ways to save lives, giving people in Hong Kong access to drugs. Many patients are saying drugs are available in the mainland. Mainland patients have access to the drugs, whereas patients in Hong Kong don't have the access. Where have things gone wrong? This is an inadequacy in public administration. The government thinking is too conservative. The government has failed to identify the fastest and easiest access to drugs for patients. Drugs are developed or allowed for use in the mainland. This is my point. This is a chance for the office to identify inadequacies in public administration, improve public administration in this regard to give Hong Kong patients access to drugs. Otherwise, you end up with a situation where people see there are drugs available but simply don't have access to it. Now, identifying inadequacies in public administration is part of our duties. Our direct investigations achieve just that. Complaints about public administration has to do with individual matters. When there are systemic flaws without maladministration, we can also conduct direct investigations. We set out this point in our annual report. That means we do take forward our work in that regard. It's my turn. Now, we want to see the Ombudsman's office play a more proactive role in the new era, and part of that means identifying inadequacies in the public administration and proposing remedial actions to improve public administration. You can take a broader view of this description. You can propose various measures. People want to see results. If you can achieve this, people can see better results. The Ombudsman knows what your functions are. If you need more powers, that's not entirely impossible. As long as the requests are reasonable, I'm sure the Council will support the proposal. We will stop here at this item and move on to the next item. An issue raised by Mr. Lau Kwok Fan, issues related to water seepage in buildings. He's not around, so I will brief everyone on this issue. I think no briefing is needed. Anyone with district experience knows this. Now, this Joint Office for Investigation of Water Seepage Complaints, despite all the work done in the past, the results are less than satisfactory. Use of backward technologies, cumbersome handling procedures, and the low success rate. People are left distressed. So people go to lawmakers, and lawmakers come to the government with this issue. In 2017, on December 5th, 2017, we had a meeting and we raised this point. In 2018, and recently, there was follow-up, but there has been little improvement. Is there a need to take investigation to the next level, apart from more investigations? And more members will speak on this matter.
Ombudsman. Yes, Chair. Regarding the efficiency of the Joint Office, I've set out my points in the reply and I will not repeat them. We have followed up with the Joint Office on some of our recommendations. Some of them have yet to be implemented. For instance, we asked why more than 90 days is required for follow-up action, and also the efficiency in dealing with complaints and reports, and to set out standards or parameters, and also the agreement with the consultants, and whether the penalty against underperforming consultants should be dealt with. Now, they have done some of these proposals, and they are trying out the new methods in 12 pilot areas. The use of infrared, for instance, and other new technologies. Whether they will extend the pilot to more districts, and whether more technologies will use, we will follow up. Now, on the question of water seepage, flat owners and tenants do have the responsibility to repair their premises. They should not just rely on the joint office to resolve the problem. There should be tripartite efforts. And if the owners do not cooperate, then there will be delay in fixing the problem. Now, the joint office use a non-destructive test. They will not, for instance, price open or open up a wall to look at the source of the problem. As regards the efficiency and ability of the joint office, yes, there is room for improvement, but we'll follow up. Now, there is another question on water dripping from air conditioners. Can we discuss the same as well? Or that will be under a separate issue, because each issue should have 15 minutes. All right, thank you. This problem has bothered Hong Kong for a long time. I agree with the Ombudsman. Apart from the FEHD and BD, building owners are also responsible. Still, the source of contention is no one can tell the source of water seepage. Yes, I agree with Dr. Junior's hold that due to gravity, water should come from above. The question is whether it is the unit directly above the problematic spot or the one next to it. Because in Hong Kong, buildings are made of concrete, and water can travel along concrete. So the problem is always to find out the source, and it takes a long time to identify the source, and sometimes the source can never be found, and the owners are not always cooperative, and so the whole process is very protracted, and members of the public suffer a lot. I have dealt with many complaints when it comes to drains in bathroom, in toilet, and etc. Now, and then they will use a color water test to see whether the problem comes from a particular unit. For instance, if red water is used to trace the source, and if the color is found in the story below, then that's the source of the problem. Now, even with the help of the Water Supplies Department, now I referred to cases where the FEHD and BD were involved, but what about the water mains from the exterior of the building going into the building? Again, it's difficult to find out the source, but they can just turn off the main ways or the main water mains, and even without water pressure, there is still dripping, then they can tell the problem. And there is also the problem of old type of bathtub. I hear from the FEHD that they have yet to identify a problem. The only way is to remove the bathtub, and of course infrared is also a way. The FEHD must think of a way to address the problem, and I thank the Ombudsman for following up the matter on our behalf. Ombudsman, I think Mr. Shiu, he has a very good understanding of the process and the details. Yes, there is also the problem of backlog of cases. To handle this, maybe more manpower or resources is needed. With more cases, and as our buildings continue to age, this problem is going to deteriorate. So the office needs resources and manpower. And in the third stage, consultants are called in, and again, that requires resources. If this is such a serious problem in the community, the administration may want to consider giving more resources to the joint office. Dr. Junius Ho, thank you. A suggestion for you. Because the joint office is responsible, and then there is also a building management office, and we understand that owners are also parties. And then the joint office hasn't got enough resources and manpower. It has a backlog of cases. You have pointed out the crux of the matter. These issues are bound to worsen because our buildings are getting old. Now, it's not that the owners in the lower story doesn't want to cooperate, because the owner has already suffered. Even there may be a spoiling from the ceiling as well. And if the owner in the lower story takes initiative to apply for an order, then it's difficult as well. So can we set up KPIs? So if a complaint has been lodged after some time, then the owner in the story above must take action. Now, consultants are expensive. They will charge you at least $6,000. But even so, their performance is very poor. The owner in the lower story is more than happy to pay. He only wants access to the upper unit, and we need the joint office to intervene at this part. And if we can standardize the procedures, then we can streamline the process and the cost to apply for court order. So if the department has come out to confirm that there is a problem of water seepage, and because of inaccessibility to the upper unit, nothing can be done. So a court order can be issued, and this can reduce the possibility of confrontation. So if we are willing, then there should always be a way. So the owner of the lower story is always willing to pay even up to $50,000 to hire a consultant. So we can use the user pay principle, and if the cost is the upper unit, then the owner should be asked to share the cost. Thank you. Yes, we have mentioned and asked the joint office to improve the work process. This is among our recommendations that have yet to be implemented. And then from 2004 to December 2022, 70 cases were resolved by mediation out of 200 odd cases. So we are employing flexible ways. As suggested by Dr. Junius Ho, our target is to resolve the problem, to help the parties to fix the problem. So if mediation can be used, we are happy to mediate. it's now my time. Yes, I understand the difficulties faced by the Ombudsman because these questions are complicated. And I think what Dr. Junius Ho said was correct. The occupant in the lower story is helpless, and if the owner of the upper story is uncooperative, then the only way is to seek a court order. And I think the actual improvements are limited. It may be unfair if we expect the Ombudsman's office to tackle alone this very long-standing and thorny issue, and the responsibility lies with the FEHD. You've asked them to give you an investigation report and response that will be more pragmatic. Right now, we are not tackling the actual problems, and the backlog will continue to grow. Now, if there are no further questions, we end this issue. Next, water dripping from air conditioners. Again, it was raised by Mr. Lau Kwok Fen, who has sent in his apologies, and I will introduce the item on his behalf. It's been clearly pointed out in the paper that water dripping from aircon may seem a minor problem, but it can be a genuine nuisance during the summer. And the law enforcement is ineffective, and then prosecution procedures are complicated. Mr. Lau would like to know whether the Ombudsman will conduct a direct investigation. Thank you. Our reply can be found in the paper. We will continue to monitor the progress, and among the complaints we've received, most of them have followed the set procedures. But there are bound to be more and more air conditioners, and the number of complaints will grow as well. So we should tackle the problem at source. There should be more publicity and education to the public, and also building management buildings, such as the merits in having a central water draining pipes. And then these dripping issues should be pursued even during autumn and winter, so that come summer, the problem will not continue to bother passers-by or members of the public. FEHD should do more, and they will continue to follow up. In particular, when we receive complaints, we will continue to refer these problems and follow up with the FEHD. Mr. Shukafat, in mid-2020, I received a complaint. Someone I knew well in my constituency, he lodged a complaint with the FEHD on water dripping of an aircon, but after investigation, the FEHD wrote back to say that there was not a problem, and so did the building management office. I was shown a video showing water dripping, wetting his office desk, and I wrote to the director of FEH. Now she has been promoted, and I wrote to the director, and the day afterwards I was told by the complainant that there was no more water dripping. So things can move very quickly so long as you're willing to take action. While I won't say that it's always the case, I believe most FEHD staff are dedicated, and we have seen marked improvement in water dripping on the streets. When I was younger, when air conditioners were a novelty, there was water dripping everywhere, but nowadays people are willing to use communal drainage pipes. and we may have isolated cases, and I believe the tenants don't really want to affect public. It's just that they are not aware of the problem until they have a complaint. So there should be more frequent inspections, and there should be follow up. And most air conditioners have a metal case, and they go rusty, and the lifespan is actually shorter than that of the air conditioners. And we have seen truss-up frames to support air conditioning. So I hope FEHD can follow up because sometimes they are not easily accessible. And if the frames are rusty and if they fall from height, then there can be injuries and even fatalities. So you should follow up. Ombudsman, thank you very much for your suggestion, and thank you for raising the issue.
These issues will get more serious if we have more air conditioners. Now, with Operation Building Bright, something can be done in terms of the maintenance of buildings. If we can have a communal drainage pipes and more liaison with the property management firms, we can do more publicity and education. This takes more than just the FEHD. The property management firms also have to step up inspections to resolve the issue. We will keep an eye on the problem. Next, Ms. Carmen Khan. We talked about water seepage and also the air conditioner dripping issues. These two matters have to do with the FEHD. What are some observations of the Ombudsman regarding the FEHD? The FEHD is now under the Environment and Ecology Bureau. Does that mean that there will be improvement in the work of the FEHD? We need a change in mindset. We're always using outdated ways to address problems. We should be forward-looking in our solutions instead. Can we review the Ombudsman's ordinance to give the Ombudsman more powers? Can we also do something about the memorandum with the government to get the department to step up their work? Thank you. We will look at the ordinance and the memorandum of understanding to see if there's a need to update the memorandum. The FEHD works on many things related to livelihood and quality of life. Now, the work have to do with public hygiene and convenience ordinance. It's a very broad portfolio. Rodents, mosquitoes, cleanliness. These are things closely related to people's daily lives. So a lot of times our investigations have to do with the FEHD. But it's not appropriate to take that as the reason for criticizing the FEHD. Now, we identify inadequacies. We will need more time to see if there is improvement in the work of the FEHD. Now, we will stop here for this item. The last item. Our meeting is supposed to end at 12:45, so let's keep questions and replies brief. If members do not object, I will extend the meeting by no more than 15 minutes. Issues related to the arrangement of the hospital authority referring patients to private hospitals for treatment. This matter is raised by Mr. Edward Leung. Mr. Edward Leung, please. There were 12 private hospitals in Hong Kong. 5 of them receive government subsidies or have land premium waivers. 2 of such 5 hospitals offer low charge beds under an agreement with the government. So they charge public hospital fees but provide private hospital beds. But there are 3 other private hospitals. They are given concessionary or even no land rates. So people have the impression that private hospitals are profiteering. They're even profiting off tax dollars. So for these 3 private hospitals, when will their land lease expire? Before the expiry, can we insert conditions into the land lease clauses to make sure they discharge their social responsibilities? I'm grateful to the Ombudsman's office for the improvement measures. Previously, the referral arrangement would kick in only during the flu surge seasons, but the Ombudsman's office proposed regularizing the referral mechanism so that it kicks in even outside the flu surge season. But I don't see any penalty clauses or any warning system. Private hospitals fell short during the 5th wave of COVID outbreak in terms of receiving COVID patients. This has to do with the lack of a penalty system. So why this lack of a penalty systems? If private hospitals aren't doing enough, can we have a penalty system? In July 2020, our office conducted a direct investigation into the usage of low-charge hospital beds in private hospitals. Now, we covered the hospitals under the public-private partnership. There is keen public demand for hospital services during COVID and the flu season. Public hospitals are overwhelmed. In our investigation, we looked at not just the low charge bed, we also recommended that the mechanism for referring public hospital patients to private hospitals be made a standing mechanism. The Secretary for Health discussed this matter at the LegCo so that the referral will happen not just during the flu season. This will become a standing mechanism. We are pleased to see this development. For land grant agreements, though, it is up to the government to insert any requirement into the land grant conditions. If something isn't in the land grant conditions, then there is no way to coerce private hospitals to take part in this arrangement. The Secretary for Health has had meetings with the 13 private hospitals. On 13th of September 2022, 423 private hospital beds were made available for public hospital patients. The goal was to achieve a 20% usage rate. It really depends on whether the referral is part of the land grant conditions. Apart from packages, low charge beds, it's not something that private hospitals other than the 2 offer. Now, if private hospitals can take in more patients, and that will help relieve the pressure on public hospitals. Mr. Jesse Shang, for the 400 or so beds, Referral is just a means. I want the Ombudsman to keep an eye on the situation. 413 hospital beds. This should be incorporated into the hospital authority system. You need to have the 400 odd beds in the system so that the beds are on the radar. There's a need to make sure the data is available. Of course, we need patients' consent and protect patients' privacy. The data needs to be shared with private hospitals. And the data of the private hospitals need to be made available to public hospitals. This is one way to enhance the operational efficiency of public and private hospitals. This is something I want to suggest, and this is something that should be taken forward by the hospital authority. This is an important issue. Our direct investigation was about the low charge bed. We touched on the referral mechanism. We will continue to look into this issue. If we have a similar investigation, we will make an announcement in the future. Dr. David Lam, I referred patients to private hospitals. That's my declaration of interest. For the land grant conditions, are these private hospitals required to take public hospital patients at lower charges? Or do they have to offer the same fee as public hospitals, regardless of the surgeries involved or the hospital stay? So what specifically are the requirements under these land grant conditions? Now there is now a strategic purchasing office. Is the office required to purchase services from private hospitals? Or do private hospitals offer the services free of charge? Do we still keep this dual track system, public hospitals and private systems? I think the hospital bed ratio is more like 6-1, public versus private. Only 2 private hospitals offer the low charge beds. So the low charge beds were just about the beds. They may not cover all the hospital fees. There may be packages at concessionary rates, but low charge beds are not part of the land grant conditions for other hospitals, so I'm not aware of how things work for the other private hospitals. The agreement with the 13 private hospitals also falls outside the scope of our direct investigation. If needed, we can see whether a direct investigation is needed. The Strategic Purchasing Office has recently been set up. We'll need to give it time to see how it works. We keep an eye on this issue. A follow-up question.
We just heard from some colleagues that private hospital beds should be incorporated into our public sector. So I'd like to know, in the long run, do we still want to have a dual track hospital bed system so that people who would want a more comfortable hospital services, they can go to a private hospital? Now, this is about use of resources, and there should be discussion in the community to reach a consensus. It's not for us to say the proportion of private and public beds and whether we should change the role of public healthcare sector. Now we are talking about the referral of public hospital patients to private hospitals to use their low patient hospital beds. Our concern is whether the current system is effective. Thank you. All right. Well, this is a rather big issue. We have no more members waiting to ask questions, so Ombudsman, please continue to follow up on this matter. AOB, any AOB? I have a simple suggestion for the Ombudsman. Now, not in 2021, but earlier on. In one of the reports, there were a number of more complaints about the Home Affairs Department or district offices, perhaps also related to building management. I haven't seen any direct investigation from your office with regard to the role of district officers in building management under CAP 344 and disputes in the community related to buildings management is also a concern. Let's see if your department or your office is ready to conduct a direct investigation into this. Any other questions? No, then I understand that the Ombudsman and his team has worked very hard during the pandemic. On behalf of the Council, I'd like to express our gratitude to you. But you have to consider that given that we're in a new era, people have higher expectation of your role, and under the leadership of the Ombudsman, perhaps your office can play a bigger role. Once again, I want to thank the Ombudsman and his colleagues for attending this meeting. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.